we will persevere together. Okay, let's try. Thumbs up, thumbs down. You can see it? Priyanka, can see it? Okay,
we
wonderful.
can see it. Your audio just cut out for a second, but you're good now. You're back.
Ooh, okay. I wonder if we're having some connectivity adventures. I think we're fine. If there's anything like that happens again, please let me know. We'll figure it out. Thank you. All right, great. Thank you. Oh, shoot. Okay. Do you want to give me 30 seconds to try a couple like tech things on my end? Awesome. Do you want to have a 3-minute discussion on Flask? And I will BRB.
Yep, no worries. Thank you.
All right, friends, how about now? Can you hear me? Am I choppy? No? Okay, great. Thank you for your patience. All right, wonderful. So we're starting a workshop about Flask. Go back to the intro slide if I can navigate there. Nope, there you go. Okay, Flask 101, building your first web app with Python Flask. Welcome, so excited to have you. So during this 45-minute workshop, we are going to do 5 different things. For the first 5 minutes, I'm going to do a quick Flask project demo. So I have made a very, very simple Flask web app for you, and it's animal shelter themed. So I will do a demo of that, so you have an expectation of like what I'm going to be even talking about during this workshop. We're then going to take some time and talk about what Flask actually is, why we need it or don't need it, right? Like what situations we need it in. And then we're going to go through the actual guts of the workshop, which is the structure of a Flask app. So we can talk about what the different parts of the directory structure are, what their purposes are, which ones you need and maybe don't need. So that'll be fun. And then for 10 minutes, we're going to have some live coding examples. So this is going to be an adventure, especially with our new connectivity situation. But the idea is that now that we have an idea of what a Flask app looks like and what the parts are, we can have a little more interactive time where you can say, hey, we should add this, and then I will add it to the web app and share my screen. And if everything goes well, I'll like write some code and you can see how it looks on our web app. And then for the last 5 minutes, I am going to share with you the sample code for this app that we're doing. Again, it's animal shelter themed. It is very simple. If you have a hack in mind that you're doing for the hackathon and it's not an animal shelter, that's okay. You can absolutely use this sample code if you want as a starting point to really bootstrap your project and maybe copy paste some of your own stuff in there or take out the parts you don't need. So yeah, that's a little bit about what we're going to be doing. A quick note, if anyone is joining this workshop specifically to learn about API design, that is not what I'm going to be talking about. It's a really awesome part of Flask app development. I've just chosen, given the time constraint and generally what people make in hackathons, I've chosen to instead focus on Jinja templating. So if you're here about API design, totally respect that. It's a really cool topic. That's not what I'm going to be talking about. So FYI. Great. All right, so before we jump in, I'm going to introduce myself. So hello, everyone. I am Madeline. I am a platform software engineer at Sprout Social. Platform, for those of you who haven't heard the word before in this context, it basically just means backend. So most of the time I write code in Python and Java for my job. I have a bachelor's degree in computer science from Notre Dame. I graduated a few years ago, so I'm a recent grad, but not super, super recent. I know for the people who are at my last workshop, you've heard all this before, but you can get a great refresher. And I am based out of Chicago, Illinois in the US. A couple quick fun facts about me is that I play the trumpet. and that I've been really involved with Girls Who Code in a few different ways. I don't know if anyone else also has been involved with Girls Who Code, but I had a great time. I love it. Priyanka's like, yes, oh my gosh, it's awesome. Awesome. Highly recommend if anyone's looking for a great community or an opportunity, like an alternative to an internship, be a TA for summer. It's very, very cool. All right. Let's continue. Let's jump right in. Wow, we have a lot of people, 189, go team. Oh my gosh, let's learn about Flask. Okay, I'm gonna do a demo for you. So bear with me here. I am gonna stop sharing this screen and I am going to instead share a different one once I find it. Thank you for your patience. Okay, how do I do this? So, you know what? I have a better idea. Okay, how about I share my whole thing instead of one window, and that way I won't have to keep resharing. Okay, great. Can you see my slide deck right now? Okay, great. Cool. So what we're going to be making is, come on, computer, you can do it. You can do it. All right, is this. This is what we're going to be making. This is our sample Flask application. And again, it is animal shelter themed. I chose this because during COVID, I've started fostering cats for my local animal shelter, and it's something that's been on my mind. So other than that, I have no reason to choose this. So we have something to note really quick is that we are navigating to an actual web application through what's called localhost. You can type in the words localhost, or you can do 127.0.0.1. I don't know why localhost means that exact like local IP situation. I don't know, but something to look up if you're curious. On port 5000, and interesting, we have a /dogs. I wonder what that means. Weird. So we have a nice homepage here, all dogs. Let's see. We have some pictures. It looks like a Boston Terrier. Yep, Boston Terrier, age 2, named Spot. Cute. Then we have a pug that's available named Pixie, age 7. Awesome. We got a cute golden here. Ooh, and then we have a form at the bottom. And this is for, it looks like adding a new dog. Cool. That's something we could try out later, maybe. And then let's click on this tab up here. We also have a page called Random Dog. And if you notice, this URL is Random Dog up here too. So I'm going to click Random Dog again. Oh, we got a different one. Fun. And click it again. Boston Terrier. And as you saw, we have currently 3 dogs in our animal shelter. So pretty small group here. So when we choose a random one, it's common that we might get the same one in a row. But yeah, this is our Flask app. Our homepage is that this is a really great animal shelter. So pretty great. This is what we're going to be making. And yes, this is a bootstrap nav bar if anyone's wondering where that came from. Great. Does anyone have any really quick questions about what I just showed before we move on to actual, like what Flask is? Oh, I need the chat, don't I? Oh man, so many things. Oh. Okay, I see that there are a lot of messages in chat and adore. Oh yeah, the dogs are cute. Is there going to be a follow along demo? So when yeah, that's a great question. So when we get to the like last portion and we're writing our own code, I'll show you exactly how you can run the application and then see the same thing on your own local machine, so that you could go to a browser, you could navigate to localhost just like I just said, and then pull up your own Flask app there. I hope that answers the question. Another way you could do this, if you're, so to answer your question, Mercy, I think Mercy is me. What you might do is if you, actually, I'll just do it over here. If you have a browser and you open this, you can literally type in, okay, mine's autofilling because I typed it recently, but you can literally type in 127.0.0.1 and whatever port your application is on in this sample. And by default, Flask apps are on port 5000. Someone made a decision once and they're on 5000. And if you hit enter, you'll be brought to your Flask application if you use the sample code. I hope that helps clarify that a little bit. All right, great. I'm going to go back to my slides and we will talk about why someone might choose to use Flask. So I'm going to start presenting again. It's thinking. You can do a Google. I know there's a lot going on right now, but you can do it. All right, great. Can everyone see my screen that says, what is Flask? Great. All right. So let's talk a little bit about different kinds of software projects and stacks that exist in the world. So first of all, why do we need web frameworks? Like, what even are web frameworks? So web frameworks provide a structure for building big, complex web applications. That's my own personal summary for you. There are lots of other definitions online, different technical sites that, if you're new to programming, those definitions can be pretty overwhelming, and they might define the term web framework in other terms that you're not familiar with, so it can be kind of tricky, which is why I've chose my own definition here. Short answer, you don't need a web framework. A web framework is just a tool that could help you build a more complex web application if that's what you want to do. So I have a few different sample tech stacks that projects, particularly hackathon projects, might have. So they are starting on the left from simplest to the right, which is the most complex. So let's start with, and as you can see, we have a front end category up here and a back end category right here. So for hack number one, you might have a few different kinds of files, assuming you're making a website. Obviously, there are many other kinds of hackathon projects, and that's great, but let's assume you're making a web application or website of some sort in this world. For hack number one, you might have some HTML files, some CSS files, and some JavaScript files. And that's great. If that's what you're familiar with and you want to stick to that to achieve your goal of having a static web page, that's awesome. And I totally applaud you for doing that. There are some situations where that's absolutely the best decision to go with. Not all websites are extremely complicated, and it's okay to do that. So hack number two is a different kind of, hack number one, you can see that that kind of hack doesn't have a backend. I put in parentheses none because there isn't a backend for it. And these different hacks have different options. Like, it's okay if you're making a proof of concept for an idea, you might not necessarily need a backend. Maybe you just need some hard-coded data to get your point across for now. And that's perfectly okay. So hack number two is a little bit different. It builds off of hack number one, where you do also have some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript files but you're using Flask as a tool to help with the front end. And as you can see in this, it encompasses the front end and it goes also and serves the back end purpose. So this is one kind of way or like format of a hack that you could have. I've circled this one because this is the kind of app that I'm going to be doing in this workshop. And yeah, it's a very valid option if it matches your situation. Hack number three is a little different, where it's a lot more focused on front end work. So if you're really curious or experienced with even React or Angular, some front end frameworks that are really, really cool, maybe you want to focus on that and just build on top of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript a really dynamic, really modern, complex front end. And that's great. Another option is doing something similar to hack number three, but in addition to having that complex dynamic front end using a framework like React, you also could have a separate back-end application that the front end application can talk to and get data from, communicate with back and forth. And then that backend would basically manage the data that you're storing and any business logic that needs to happen before the front end displays it for you. Does that make sense at all? I don't know if I'm explaining this well. I'm going to look at the chat real quick and see if that made sense. Okay, I take that back. Opening the chat is stressing out my computer, so I'm going to skip that. I'm assuming that makes sense. Something to note here, hack number 4 and hack number 2 both involve Flask. So in some situations, you might choose to use Flask, but you're not using it for the front end. Maybe you're using React or something else for the front end, and that is perfectly valid. That's perfectly okay. But again, in this situation, I'm going to show you how you can use Flask for both backend and for front end. All right, great. Let's continue. So why might you use Flask for front end? We know there are these different options, but why might you choose hack number 2? Flask might be a good fit for your project's front end if, and here's a few different situations why you might choose this. Your app is small and simple. And generally for hackathon projects, the apps are relatively small and simple, and that's great. So Flask could be a really great fit for this. Another idea or situation is that you might need to build the first version of a project really, really quickly. So say you work at a company and you have this idea, but you have a really quick deadline. You need to get something done and you don't have the time to really make a complex React or Angular front end. Maybe Flask could be a fit for that situation. And then number 3, maybe you're really familiar with Python, but you're not as familiar with JavaScript and you want to get this thing done. Eventually maybe learn JavaScript, but if you're really familiar with Python, you want to stick to it, that could be another reason why you choose to do Flask for the front end. Okay, another note. I've said this like 3 times. I'm going to say it again. If you choose to not use Flask for your front end, that is perfectly okay. That's fine. I'm not here to tell you that Flask is the best front end choice because there are a lot of really awesome front end tools out there, and that's awesome. You could use Flask to build a backend only application and then use something else for the front end. It really just depends on the situation you're in, the project you want to make, like the goals you have. So if it's a good fit, then this could be a great option for you. But there are situations in life when Flask is not something you should use for front end, and that's fine too. All right, so let's jump into the structure of a Flask app. In this part, we're going to talk about what the roles are of the different parts of the app. So apologies in advance. I know that my screenshots on the right are a little fuzzy. I tried to expand my screen or zoom in a little bit and make them clearer, but I had a lot of trouble with it. So I figured I would show the fuzzy one. So the screenshot on the right is the real file structure of the sample Flask app that I'm going to be showing you today, the animal shelter app. So what we're going to do first, we're going to take this step by step and look at the different parts of the file structure and talk about what their role is in the overall app. So first, let's focus on requirements.txt and myenv, which is a directory. Here we go. All right, great. So let's jump in a little bit about virtual environments. Python, just like any other piece of software, has many different versions. And during this workshop and this particular Flask sample app, we're using Python 3.6. So it's not the most recent version of Python. That's fine. It's pretty recent. But yeah, we're using 3.6. In Python development, virtual environments are used to organize different packages, aka basically libraries, that are needed for different projects. So imagine, this was really hard for me when I first got started with Python, because I was like, what? Like virtual environments, I don't need those in C++. Like what even are these? So I'm going to talk about these a little more. Imagine you are working on 3 different Python projects at the same time. You have your animal shelter app, then you might have another app for like food organizing, I don't know, but whatever. You have 3 different apps, and all of those different apps use different versions of Python. That could very well happen. And then if you have different versions of Python, you might also need different versions of libraries, because those are also like the versions are all interdependent. So instead of trying to figure out how to coordinate on your computer different versions of libraries that you have installed, instead of having them all in one spot, what you can do is you create these virtual environments, and you have one virtual environment per project. And that way, when you install packages or libraries, again, essentially the same thing, technically a little different, but whatever. When you install Python packages, you do them per virtual environment, and they live in this nice little bubble where all of those packages apply only to that project. So it helps you kind of stay organized, and you don't have to worry as much about all the different packages intertwining and then messing up potentially a different project you're working on for something else. Does that make sense? I hope that like clarified the purpose of those a little bit. Okay, I'm not looking at the chat because my computer's stressing out, but I'm assuming that's a yes. Great. So now that we know what virtual environments are, what might you do to create one and use one? I have some code examples on the bottom here. So command number 1 is how you might create a virtual environment. There are different commands you can use for this. This is just my go-to. So if you have some other one you use, and that's fine, like whatever. But this is what I usually do. Python 3, again, we're using Python 3.6. And then the syntax is -m, venv or venv, which is a command to create a new virtual environment for Python. And then the last argument is whatever you want to name your virtual environment. It can also be a path to the virtual environment, but in this case, I'm just lazy and I'm just like, whatever, I'll put it in this spot. So that's what that command does. The second command I have listed here is how you activate your virtual environment. So in essence, a virtual environment is just another directory, right? It's another directory that could live in your like file hierarchy. And that directory as a virtual environment, as it was created, has some different scripts already in it. One of those scripts lives under bin and is called activate. And you can run source to activate that virtual environment. And what that does is it, I don't know how to articulate this technically and in a way that makes sense, but it basically makes your virtual environment present in all terminal windows that you have open at the time. So anyway, we can talk about that a little more later. And then finally, deactivate, which is very easy to run. You don't need any other arguments. Deactivates that virtual environment. If you wanted to go into and enter into a different one or activate a different one, you would be able to do that after deactivating. Great. That was fun. All right, let's talk more about packages. So pip is a package manager for Python projects. So if you've done other kinds of projects, you might be familiar with npm, apt-get if you use Windows, brew if you use Mac, etc. There are a bunch of these. All of those tools or commands, depending on how you think of them, are essentially the same idea, right? Pip is just one that we use for Python. But yeah, they're the same thing. So what you can do to install one package is you run the command pip install Flask. So that just installs the one package, Flask. But say you're like, okay, well, I could spend my whole day running pip install this, pip install this, pip install this. Or I could be more efficient and I could create a requirements.txt file. And then you can run a similar but slightly different command, pip install -r, and then the name of your requirements.txt file. And pip will then know, oh, okay, I need to install every package that's listed in this file. So it's a more efficient way to do things. If you're working on a really complex or like big Python project, you definitely will have a requirements.txt file. To help point you in the right direction and build good habits. I've included one in this, even though we literally only have one package, which is Flask, but that is the purpose of requirements.txt. Great, that was awesome. So now we've talked about requirements.txt and myenv, which is our virtual environment. And what we want to do now is talk about app.py, which is the actual guts of the Flask app. Ooh, okay, this is fun. So as I said, app.py is the actual core of the Python Flask application. All of the other files that we'll talk about are basically optional. You probably should have them, but if you wanted to just make the world's smallest Flask app, you don't really need them. All you need to run this Flask application is what you see on the right, which is a screenshot of a very, very simple Flask application. So let's talk about what we see in this example, which could be app.py. We are first importing the Flask class. So you can see that. I know we don't have line numbers here. My bad. Sorry, I should have screenshotted those. But imagine line 1. We're importing the Flask class. We're then creating an instance of it. So you can see the app equals Flask and then name. That's what we're doing there. And then this is like the really fun part. We are using a decorator. And in Python, a decorator starts with an, oh my God, I'm blanking on what it is, an @ sign, you know what I mean? Like in an email. I was gonna say ampersand. I was like, wait, that's not what that is. Whatever. You have the @ app.route, and that tells Flask which URL. So again, think back to our demo, the dogs, the /dogs, which URL should trigger what function in our Python app. So in this case, we're saying we have an index function. You can see we have def index, that's a function. And right above it, you see our decorator. You have app.route, some good parameters that we'll talk a little more about later. But that's us indicating that we want that route, the / to trigger our index function. And if you look one line later, if that URL is called, aka index function is triggered, then we will render a template called index.html. Interesting. Very fun. Let's continue. So now that we know what a very simple Flask app would look like, I'll tell you a little bit more about how to run it. So the first time you run your Flask application, you should set the Flask app environment variable. That might be some foreign words to you, and that is totally okay. For now, what you need to know is you need to run export space Flask_app, and then you set that equal to whatever your file name that your Flask application lives in is called. I don't know, that wasn't a sentence, but you know what I mean. You export Flask app equals app.py. If you rename app.py to like hello.py, then you would export that name instead. That's basically telling or setting universally in your computer or in your virtual environment what what file it should look for when it tries to run the Flask app. And then the fun part is you just run Flask run as a command, and ta-da, your application is running. Some sample output that would indicate that your app is successfully running is screenshotted below. So imagine you ran those two commands. You might see serving Flask app.py, looking good. Some information about our environment and debug mode if we're using that, which in this case we're not. And then an actual link to where that application is running. So I think this answers some questions in the chat before. Like, okay, so I ran this thing, I have some code, I ran these commands, but like, where is it? That's a really helpful way to know, like, oh, okay, like where is this running? You can just look at what's in the output after you ran your application. Great. So we talked about app.py. The next part we're going to talk about is the templates directory. So that's actually where the HTML and the Jinja lives. All right, HTML files are also known as templates. So for our purposes here, you can think of those as synonymous. And those templates may consist of many tags, and they serve as the structure of the web pages. So this applies to websites everywhere. Some of you might already be familiar with HTML, and that is great. If not, it's a really fun thing. There's lots of great tutorials to learn about HTML, but for this, I'm going to assume that you are already somewhat familiar with HTML. And then to build off of that, Jinja is a web template engine specifically for Python. It supports simple logic, like loops and if statements. Keyword is simple logic. It's not really a programming language in itself. It's a template engine. So you shouldn't try to do really complex logic in Jinja. Like, I don't even think it supports complex logic. It's only simple logic. Great. So let's look at the screenshot that I have here. Display dogs info. Okay, probably displays dogs info. As you can see, if you're familiar with HTML already, there are some components of this that are just like normal HTML, right? We see some tags. We have a nice image tag here. That's probably an image, probably an image of our dog, knowing what demo code we already looked at. We have a height set. We have this kind of weird stuff going on here. It looks kind of funky. Then we have alt text. Okay. We have another couple tags here, but some key things to note, which are not part of like normal HTML, is the Jinja code, which is denoted in a couple different ways here. We have this syntax. There's a curly brace and a %sign. And look, we actually have a for loop in here. So we have for dog and dogs, and then we have an end for down here. So this code actually repeats what's going on in like the content block for that for statement, or yeah, for loop. It repeats that content in HTML several times for however many dogs are in dogs. It's a confusing way for me to articulate that, but I think you get what I mean. Another couple things to point out are that in some of these values, in some of these HTML tags, instead of just typing out like your dog's name and hard coding it in there, one of our examples was spot. I didn't write spot in the code. I wrote this curly brace syntax and then dog.name. And using Jinja and Python Flask, which I'll show you how this works on the Python side in a sec, we're able to put that value dynamically into this H3 tag instead of hard coding it. So that's another thing, pretty cool. Going back up to our image tag, we also have a URL for example. So we'll talk next about our static folder, but if you want to import anything in your HTML, like a CSS file that's local or a JavaScript file that's local, or in this case, an image, you need to use a URL for syntax. Flask is kind of annoying in that way, but it is what it is. And so you can't just like dynamically put in the source name. You have to point it specifically to the static folder. So something to note, I'm not going to dive too deep into that, but if you run into that in your own Flask app, there's lots of great resources online on what the syntax should be and why the syntax is the way it is. All right. Great. We've talked about templates. And like I said, now we're going to talk about the static folder. In the static folder, that's where you'll find CSS, JavaScript, and any images or other media in your website. So the static directory contains files that are static, which means they basically don't change, unlike those HTML templates. So to repeat this again, some files that might live in your static directory are CSS, which is used for styling. If you need fonts or some spacing or different colors, that's where you'd include that. In our example, in our sample code, that lives under static and styles. Some people name it something else, but I prefer styles. So that's why I put that there. JavaScript files might also be under your static directory. And in this example, I included that under static scripts. And then finally, with this example, we also have images. And in the sample code, you will find those under static media. Just like I said before, to access those static files from your templates, you need to use URL for syntax. So one example of what that might look like below is including a script tag. Whereas in like normal non-Jinja HTML, all you have to do is put the path directly to that local JavaScript file and you're good to go. In this context, in Flask, what you need to do is use this URL for, so Flask, the web framework, knows where to find it. So again, a little annoying, but something to note if you might run into that if you're working in Flask. Great, we've talked about every component. Oh my gosh. Pat yourself on the back. Great job, team. I know that was a lot. It might be a little overwhelming if this is your first time working with Python, and I totally get that. It's okay to not get every single piece, but it's great that we're having a moment to talk about it and hopefully letting some of these vocab words, at least if we're hearing them for the first time, having a nice little neuron dedicated to them in our brain so that when you really dive into it, you'll have that tiny foundation that you can build off of. That's how I think about it. All right, great. Let's do some live coding. This is going to be an adventure. Let's see how this goes. Okay, so can you see my IDE right now? You can? Okay, great. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you, friends. So I have a few tasks for us that we can try doing. So number one, I'm going to run this app. This is basically a repeat of what we talked about earlier, but I want to show you what that might actually look like. Sorry, I was already running it earlier, making sure my computer was like alive. All right, great. So our first step for this, as you can see, I've already activated my virtual environment. So I've gone through those virtual environment steps. And you can tell that your virtual environment containing all those packages that I care about, you can tell that it's activated because you can see it right over here. Cool, great. So I am going to just, for demo purposes, run this again. I don't need to because I ran it earlier, but whatever, might as well do it. Can I spell Flask? Oh, my A key is sticky. Okay, Flask app Oh my God. Okay. Equals, and again, mine is called app.py. If you rename yours to hello, then that's cool. So I ran it, no errors, looks good. And then I am gonna run our app. So just to re-emphasize, like this, a Flask app is just another directory in your file system, right? It's not any different than any other directory you have, other than it has some cool stuff in it. And so I am in here and I'm going to run Flask, oh my gosh, Flask run. And you can see this output. We saw this in an earlier slide. Serving Flask app.py. Oh, sorry, I should have checked. Is this too small? Can you see it, or should I like make it bigger? I should make it bigger. Okay, sorry about that. Okay. How do I make it bigger? Zoom. That did not help.
You can maybe try, if you're on a Mac, Command and plus. If you're on a Windows or PC, Control and plus.
All right, let's try it. Ooh, okay, let me try it. Aha, yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, great. So we're in our nice big zoomed in. Is this big enough? Should I make it bigger? Okay. Okay. Can you see this a little better now? All right, great. Again, our virtual environment is activated. You can tell because of this. And I can do Flask run. I just entered. And now you can see I'm serving Flask app. Looks good. Got some stuff here. And then, oh, it's running. It's running here. So I'm going to copy paste this. I'm going to paste it into a browser of your choice. I like Chrome. Oh my God. Sorry, team. I just rebound my keyboard from all this weird keyboard stuff. Okay, here we go. There it is. Our Flask app is running. Very fun. If we look at our terminal, what you can actually see this output right here, which is a 200. And that's just another indicator that your app is working. A 200 is good. All right, great. So I'm going to click around. Nice. We have all this great stuff here. Cool. So that was fun. I'm done with my app now. We got lots of 200s because I was navigating around. What I'm going to do is I'm going to Control C because I'm done. And I'm going to clear because I don't like seeing those extra characters I typed. All right, great. That was fun. Check off that one. So task number 2, now let's add a URL route. So I have this open twice. So I'm going to dive into the code. Can you see my IDE? All right. I'm going to zoom in actually. Ooh, shoot. I don't think I can zoom in. Sorry, team. I forgot that zooming was a thing that I needed to do. Anyone know how to do this in?
Do you have an editor tab?
Editor tab? No.
Can you try Control Alt S?
Is that supposed to zoom?
It's supposed to open your preferences so you can zoom.
Oh, I can open.
Okay, there's an editor tab. There we go. And then general and change font size.
Yes.
Okay, maybe not. We're getting there.
Font? Yes. Is that good? Can you see this right here?
Yeah, that's pretty solid.
Yes, thank you. Man, this is great. All right, awesome. Thanks for hanging in there, team. I don't know why my Git ignore is open. All right, so this is really big. Can you see it though? Should I make it a little smaller? I'm just gonna, okay, I can't see the whole thing. So I'm gonna, thank you again for hanging in there with me. I'm gonna try 20. Is this all right? All right, great. So I just opened up the code for our app. I don't know how to make the file hierarchy bigger, but that's okay. You can trust me. This is what we looked at in the screenshot. We have our Flask sample code as our actual project directory name. And then within that, I chose to put my virtual environment in here too. So that has all sorts of files in it. We don't edit the files in there. We just kind of assume it's doing what it's doing. We have our static directory again with our media that has our images, our scripts, which is my one JavaScript file, and styles, which if you wanted to put CSS in there, you could put it in there. We also have templates, which are our HTML files live. And then we have our actual app itself, which is app.py. I have this file open. So I have a comment in here about databases. If you're curious about how to store data, the way I'm demoing it in this is not using a database. I'm literally just storing our data in a nice little Python dictionary, which in an actual company you would never do, but for our purposes in a hackathon, might as well, like, whatever, just put it in there and add a database later. Great, so we have, this is where we're storing our data about those different dogs you saw in our demo. We have spot, Boston Terrier, age, ID, the photo name we're associating with that dog. But this is what I really want to get to. We have a series of different functions here. And each of these start off with one or multiple of these Python decorators that are app.route. They specify what URL they correspond to. They use a method, which I'm not going to go into, but if you're curious, those are the HTTP verbs. And we then have a function and we do something in that function. In this case, we're rendering a template, index.html. Another example of this, we have dogs, and then another potential route for this is dog / some ID for a dog. We have some nice simple Python logic in here of what you might do in those different scenarios. Logic for random dog. So this is generating a random number and then using that as an index in our dogs dictionary. Not an index, it's getting the dog with that ID, but that's a whole nother thing. And then we are rendering a template for that particular dog. And then we have a create dog. So lots of cool stuff going on in here. Our goal with this live coding example was to add a route. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a route down here. And just like a good programmer, I'm going to start, oh, my Vim thing isn't. Okay, that's fine. I'm going to start by copy pasting an existing route because why not? All right. And we want to name this route something. So let's say I want in the URL to go to, oh my God, what do I want to go to? I'll go to my name, Madeline. And then we'll call our function name something fun like Madeline page. You can call your function name whatever you want. I could change this to something totally different and nothing really depends on it in Flask. But generally good thing for any programmer is to put thought into how they name different variables. So if it's good to name something that indicates what it actually does, the more detail, the better, even if it's really long. Great, so let's do something fun in here. Just for demo purposes, let's print like something cool. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go back and run my Flask app again, which lives over here. So I hit run. Looks like it's running successfully. That's great. I'm gonna refresh this. Cool. And then if you remember, we added a route, Madeline. So I'm gonna type in Madeline, I think it was Madeline, right? I'm gonna enter Madeline here. Great, got a nice error. That's cool. Why did we get an error? See, this is live coding, we know there's an error. All right, let's see. What's going on? The function did not return a valid response. Hey, that's true. All right, great. So let's look at some other parts of this output because it actually did what we told it to do. So if you look at this part right here, hello world Madeline, it actually did print what we told it to do. The problem was that Flask in these functions is looking for an HTML response that it can display for you on the page. And in this case, in our code, if you remember, we actually didn't return that. Like in this example, we're returning a template, but here we're not. So it freaked out and was like, I'm stopping, I'm not gonna do that. So to fix this error that we're encountering, we can return render template. And we can actually just put in one of our template names here. So I can create a new template if I want, just for demo purposes. That seems like a fun thing to do. So I'm gonna go I'm just going to create a new file in here. I'm going to call it madelinepage.html. Maybe in this HTML page, we can do something like, I don't know, anyone have any suggestions on what we can put in here? Maybe we just put like a header that's like, wow, super great page.
Hey, Madeline.
Uh-huh.
I'm so sorry to interject. I just wanted to let you know that it is 45 past.
Okay.
Whenever you want to start wrapping up.
Yeah, for sure. So I can do that in a sec. So once we have this template, that we just created, I can put the name of the template in here, and I can rerun the app. So it's already stopped because we had our, here we go. I'm running it. Come on, computer, you can do it. All right, great, it's running again. And now if I refresh this, you can see, wow, super great page. So that's a way to do that. I know that we're a little over on time, so I'm going to, we already kind of did these things. The one other part I wanted to point out with this was that if you want to start off with the sample code, but then maybe tweak some of the styling to make it your own and fit with your own app, all you have to do is go under, not scripts, go under styles. I have the world's simplest, it's loading, CSS file here. It has one CSS attribute pertaining to our H3. But if there's CSS you want to add, this is where you might do it. So let's say, I know we have some P tags around, some paragraphs. Say we want to make all the paragraphs blue, something like that. Sounds fun. If we rerun our app, which went somewhere, here it is, and we look at our browser again, our paragraphs, we don't want to go to this page because we don't have paragraphs on that page. Let's go to dogs. Oh, are those not paragraph tags? Okay, sorry team. I didn't even look at the templates. Let's see. Oh, well, maybe they are P's. Huh. Okay, well, I don't know why those aren't blue. I'm hard refreshing the page. Those, oh, there we go. That was why. So my browser had cached a previous version of my Flask app. This is definitely something to note if you're doing, if you're developing a web application. Sometimes the browser tries to help you out. It tries to help out the end user, and it stores a copy of past requests. And it's like, oh, if you make this request again, you probably meant the same thing. Websites don't change that often, except in the case of development, they do. So sometimes what you need to do is refresh the page. And then for me, I hold down Shift, and that does a hard refresh, and it clears the cache for you. So fun fact, that does happen sometimes. Okay, great. So that was one part I wanted to point out for you. Really, the last thing was that I want to give you a link. Oh my gosh, sorry, my computer is getting progressively slower. I don't know what the deal is. Okay, I want to give you a link to the sample code. So if you thought that was cool, or you just want, you know, a base to start off your project with, you can definitely use this sample code. This is totally free. I made it specifically for this. It is as simple as it looks. Feel free to use it in any way you would like. I don't plan on maintaining it. So if you submit a PR, I probably won't look at it, just to be real. So you can find this at github/MadelineNelson/Flask sample app. I wonder if we can also like post that in the chat somewhere so it's like easy to find. Could you do that, Priyanka? It's, but yeah, totally free. Feel free to use this. It is on GitHub. Some of you are probably very familiar with GitHub, and other people, this might be your first time hearing about it. It's a really, really helpful tool and company that is great for creating a portfolio of your code, storing it, and sharing it with other people. So yeah, I'm using GitHub for this. Great. And then as a quick review, some of the things we covered in this workshop might be the first time you heard about them. So as this is a nice list of the different concepts we talked about. If there's something that you were like, oh, what was that? Like, I should probably note that and look it up in the future. This is a quick list. Feel free to like take a picture of it if you want. All right, so what now? Now that we've done this, like, what should you actually do? There's a couple, I've listed a few ideas on what you might do given this sample code. If you're more of a beginner, you might add some more pages to your Flask app using templates and routing, just like I did in our quick demo now. You also might implement some other CRUD operations. So a CRUD operation, it's an acronym, it stands for create, read, update, or delete. And if you're talking about an entity in a project, in our example, a dog is an entity. We already have our way to create a dog. You saw at the bottom of our sample, there was a form. That's how you can create a dog. We also have the ability to read a dog, which basically means that you can get the information back and display it on the page. We can already do that. But we don't have a way to update a dog, and we don't have a way to delete a dog. So you could implement those other CRUD operations if you're looking for an idea. Some more intermediate or advanced ideas is you connect your Flask app to a database. Some examples of that might be Firebase, like a database service, MongoDB, MySQL, etc. Database of your choice, lots of great ones. Another idea is you could connect that Flask app to other software tools and data sources using an external API. I've listed some ideas here that are particularly fun. You could use the Pet Finder API. All of these are totally free, otherwise I would not use them. But the Pet Finder API, maybe you want to go with the animal shelter theme. They have lots of very real animals that aren't hard-coded dogs, like in my example. The Twitter API is particularly fun to use. NASA Mars Rover API, maybe you can make an app out of that. So they have some great data. Spotify, etc. I'm sure during this hackathon, some other companies have promoted their APIs to you. There's lots of really cool ones out there to try. Last but not least, you could host your Flask application live on the internet somewhere using a cloud service. So that might look like putting it on Heroku, AWS, Google Cloud, Azure, like any of the really cool tools out there. Heroku is probably the easiest and most feasible for a hackathon, but there are plenty of other ways to do it too. So yeah, there's lots of cool things you could do this. I really enjoy using Flask. It's a great way to get a simple, quick app off the ground and use Python. But again, it's not the right solution for every kind of project, and that's okay. Last but not least, I would love to stay in touch. This is my LinkedIn and email information. Feel free to reach out whenever. And as a quick piece of advice, I highly recommend that you connect with other hackers at Technica. That could be, people you work with on your projects, someone you meet virtually in some other way, sponsors, mentors, and workshop leaders. I know I attended a few hackathons as a student, and I had learned so much of them, and I still stay in touch with some people that I met at those hackathons, and it's been a really great network. So yeah, that's a little bit about Flask. Thank you so much for coming. I can hang out for a little bit, Priyanka. Maybe if anyone does have questions, maybe something I skipped over, I'd be happy to help out. But thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming and for the talk. I believe a lot of people were requesting your slides. So if you wouldn't mind sending them in the chat, it is entirely okay if you'd not like to, but they were all very excited to build a Flask app. So if you'd like to send your slides in the chat, that would be phenomenal. I actually have to run to a different workshop, but I will leave Ryan here for a few minutes if he would like to say thank you so much. But thank you again. Have a nice night, everyone.
Yes, I can definitely share the slides. I will do that right now when I figure out.
I just realized I created the meeting, so if I leave, it ends. So I will stay for a few more minutes, but
Okay.
I will have to run soon.
All right, great. I will definitely share. Let's see.
Stop this recording.